So we have a very distinguished panel with us today. Thank you for this to help close the session today. We are a little short on time, so we're going to have to keep this brief. But if I can ask each panellist to give just a very quick introduction to who they are and what they do, starting with Rachel.
Is it on? Hello, it's on.
It works.
Hello, I am Professor Matt Boyle, OBE. I reckon I can do a better job. Rachel Chambers. So I, if you haven't all met me yet, Chief Operating Officer for the DER Centre in the North East.
Okay, Philippa.
Hi everybody, Philippa Oldham, I'm Stakeholder Engagement Director at the Advanced Propulsion Centre.
And Mark.
Mark Cracknell, Head of Connected Automated Mobility at Zenzik.
And Joanna.
Hi, I'm Jo White, I'm the Acting Roads Development Director in National Highways.
And lastly but not least.
Hi, I'm Siddharth Kastagi, Head of Verification and Validation for Connected Autonomous Vehicles at WMG University of Warwick.
Cool, thank you. So the theme for the conference today was all around navigating the road 2.0, I should say. And that's obviously one of the big mega trends that we find ourselves up against or navigating through as an industry. And I guess the questions I would ask to the panel is, if you had the opportunity and funding, what would be your 3 top priorities to reach net zero by 2050? So anything's off the table, you can wish for what you need for, but what do we need to do to get there? I guess I'll start with Rachel as she's closest.
My 3 things. I think the first one would be around more money into the skills. I think it's been really interesting talking to everybody, and everybody I talk to has an issue in getting engineers. How do we do it quickly? And that's going to require time, people's time, investment. So I think we need more money into the skills across the full length and breadth of engineering. The next one would probably be capital equipment. I think I mentioned during my particular talk that we got 33 million, but when I look at the few zeros we need on the end, we need those few zeros, and that's just in across PMD. And I think the other one, which I've always had a bugbear with in my time working in innovation across academia and government, is a coordinated approach. If you're going to meet the targets of 2050, it's not just about PMD. We're one part of the jigsaw. I think you've got to join the dots that we may do wonderful, amazing things over the next few years, which I'm sure people in this room will, but it's not going to be much help if you haven't got the infrastructure or you haven't got the energy side sorted. So I think joining the dots, which we try to do, we talk to the likes of Faraday, etc., and try our hardest, but it really needs investment in that area to get the UK coordinated and talking to each other.
Okay, so money.
Money, yeah.
No, okay, and Philippa.
So I suppose from my side of things, I think one of the biggest challenges we've got is the decarbonisation of those transport sectors that are hard to reach, and we know hydrogen is part of the solution there, but that really needs a joined up end-to-end thinking. So from the supply, the distribution, and then the vehicles themselves, some sort of cross-governmental activity around that to demonstrate the support to the industry is a key part of it. Secondly, access to green, low-carbon energy at a reasonable price, I think, is a really critical aspect of it. And then finally, I think the point for me is to change the way that we think, and anybody that knows me knows that I've got a bit of a thing about sustainability and holistic thinking, so starting to implement life cycle methodologies into the way that we design our products and think about what we're extracting out the ground and how we can recycle that, retain it within the system.
So a big difference then is going to be that you see the hydrogen is a big difference in terms of, obviously there's a lot of focus on road transport at the moment, electrification for hydrogen, on construction, marine, aviation.
Yeah, everything, but one of the things that we see at the APC is you really hear from the OEMs, they need that commitment to know the infrastructure's there, okay, and that needs to be joined up, and the last thing that we want is vehicles running around on brown hydrogen, yeah. So making sure it's green is a key aspect of that as well.
Okay, thank you. I guess, Mark, you're coming at this from a slightly different perspective.
Yeah, and it's interesting being on the panel. We're talking about road to zero, and I'm all talking, almost flying cars and, autonomy and connectivity. So I think, probably from an infrastructure side, and it's difficult as you go down the line. I don't envy Siddhartha to try and get the 13th, 14th and 15th top things as we get down to the end. But I think, leveraging the ability to connect vehicles that are on the road to make the road network more efficient, I think is an important thing. So not just talking about emissions and tailpipe emissions, but treating it as an energy problem. So how do you reduce the energy requirement in an efficient network? So I think there's a big thing there, and probably sitting Joe's under a bit, around connectivity and the infrastructure there to drive that forwards. I think a recognition that to get to the road to zero, it's not just a one-strand thing, it's not just electrification, but the ability for connectivity and autonomy to support that and drive down, maybe in the interim as we try and decarbonise the grid, we can move to electrified vehicles, but, until the grid is, as Philippa says, is green in its entirety, we're not there yet, so can we reduce the reliance on that? And then the third part probably is more holistic from a transport perspective. Again, it's about how do we drive new behaviours on the road network. So if we can reduce the number of vehicle miles without reducing the number of passenger miles, so an investment into almost a behavioural change, process that gets people thinking differently about how they travel and the need to travel. I think is, if we had a magic lamp, that would be where I'd go.
Okay, great, thank you. Joe?
Thanks, Stephen. I'm nodding vigorously at that last point because that was one of my priorities too. Because I really do think it is about behavioural change and what lessons can we learn from the last 18 months? They've been really difficult and we've been in some really challenging times, but there are some really positive things that have happened as a result of it. So we need to sort of hang on to those things. And I totally agree. For me, that investment in research into behavioural change and how that social science can really make a difference. I think in terms of looking at highway. I get the name wrong, National Highways Decarbonisation Plan. Our third sort of aim around decarbonising road user transport, which we've set at trying to achieve by 2050, we know it's the biggest contributor, but it's also the most difficult for us to influence and change. And therefore, sort of two aspects I'd look at on that. One is investing in more charging infrastructure and particularly given consumers confidence that the vehicles they're buying, they can plan their journeys and they can have sufficient charge throughout their journey, and they can reach their destination without being on, literally rolling on empty, which people do on petrol as well. I mean, we have to remember that. The other thing I'd look at is going back to the sort of behavioural piece is actually how do you link the whole transport system? And I think David touched on it a bit in his talk this morning, David from CCAV that is, when he talked about linking all the different modes and looking at modal change and modal shift. So we're doing some great stuff around energy storage systems. We're working alongside Innovate UK on the electric road systems for freight. But actually, how else can you achieve this by shifting, say, freight onto another mode rather than using the road, for example? So, yeah, those are my three areas.
Thank you, Siddhartha.
Okay, I have to think of a 13th and 14th and a 15th one. I should have been nearer to you, Stephen. So, anyways, I think the three main things to me is, the first one would be cross-domain approach. I think we're trying to solve the same problems in land, marine, and aviation, and these domains are not talking to each other. So the government is investing in future flight, it's investing in autonomy, it's investing in electrification, and marine autonomy, but nobody's talking to each other. The approaches and the questions are the same, but we're not doing that. So I think that's the first thing we need to do. Second is, from a government perspective, I think there's a lot of ask that we have, but I think there should be a balance between a carrot and a stick. A lot of the times when you have informed policy interventions, then you can drive things forward because industry will have to come on board with those interventions. The challenge is we don't have enough of those informed policy interventions. So if we are really serious of all the technologies that we are looking at, I think the electrification is being driven because there's an intervention from the government in terms of policy. We need something similar in the other domains like autonomy, be it marine, be it land, be it aviation. Without that, it's not going to happen. We just will have only trials and trials and trials. So that's not going to cut. And the last one is a personal favorite of mine, because I've said this previously, is we need to take a systems approach when we're trying to solve things. We tend to be, as engineers, very siloed in what we are doing at a component level or at the system that we are only interested in, not interacting with the public and the society. So systems engineering approach to solving the larger issue that we are trying to solve, be it autonomy, be it aviation, electrification, that needs to happen. So those are my three.
Thank you. And I think that's a great answer. I'll tell you why, because the next question is all about collaboration. And collaboration is an easy question to answer because everyone's going, yep, that's great. What is it that isn't happening? What is it what are the big things that need to change so that we can collaborate more easily together? Now, you've sort of talked a little bit about that. You mentioned that the different funding bodies aren't talking to each other. And I'll maybe start at that end. What are the big things that you say? You know what, we've got APC, we've got Faraday, we've got Innovate UK and DER. But what isn't happening? What are the big changes that if we said to government we need to change, what would that be?
I'll qualify myself by saying if you compare internationally, I think UK
Absolutely.
does very well in terms of collaboration. So I think industry and academia in the UK do very well compared to Germany or the States, etc. I think what's not happening is the organizations working in their silos. We somehow need to break those silos. So if you look at any government body, or if you look at even an industrial organization, they tend to work in their silos. If you're driven on this, let's say, on electrification path only, but you're solving the same problem as somebody in autonomy, let's say, how do you define safe enough? Now that's a question that land autonomy has to answer, aviation autonomy has to answer, marine autonomy has to answer. So somehow we need to break that. So silo breaking would be my first one.
Okay, thanks. That's a really interesting one. I'm looking forward to coming to Philippa because I've made that same point to Ian Constance in the past, and he's very vehement. He told me that everyone is talking together, so we'll come to that. But I guess before we get there, I guess Joanne, from your point of view, what needs to happen from a transport point of view?
So I think some of it is about maturity in the space. You know, if I think about where we are as highway, I've done it again, as national highways. It's the end of the day.
Need to stop changing your name.
Yeah, I know. I will get there in the end. But I think as national highways, you know, we've published our decarbonisation plan. Well, maybe 5 years ago we weren't really in the same space. So we're growing in our maturity, and as a result, we need to get to know, you know, the industry better. I think around that, you know, we've been very focused on managing a road network and the infrastructure associated with that, and how, you know, modernising that. But actually, we're now stepping more into how do we enable the move to net zero? How do we enable electrification? So it is, for me, it's about maturity, and actually. Conferences like this and events like this are absolutely key to making that networking happen. And sometimes you only say one thing and then it sparks an interest in a project and all sorts. So for me, you know, it is that networking and you know, let's carry on doing stuff like this and do more of it.
So more sort of engagement with industry, or industry engagement with the networking.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mark, I guess Zenzik are in a funny place at the moment, and the future autonomous vehicles is going through, I guess, a bit of a with everything that's happening with COVID. It's difficult to understand where autonomous vehicles are going. 2 years ago, we said everyone's going to be having shared mobility, and that's clearly not the case. What do you think needs to happen for autonomous vehicles and all these sorts of technologies to take off?
Yeah, one of the last big questions that, Steve, thanks.
Yeah. In as little time as possible as well, please.
12 seconds, yeah, indeed. So I think we've definitely seen a shift from, you know, the big buzzwords of you know, robo-taxis and shared transport, and a shift away, and as Joe says, probably a sustained shift in behaviour. Actually, probably use cases around freight and logistics becoming more important. Nick Reed shared a diagram on the hype curve, and we think possibly coming out of the trough of disillusionment, but I think it'll be key about the use cases, and that point about collaboration for me is, I think there's a lot of great collaboration happening in R&D and early trials, because it's easy to collaborate and then you can all just, if you don't get on, you can just disappear and pat yourselves on the back and say that was a great project. But for me, what's not happening or we need to focus on is how can we scale up deployment through collaboration, because I think you need to maintain that collaboration. We can't suddenly expect someone to go and deploy an autonomous vehicle service or deploy all the infrastructure we need to charge vehicles on their own, and so maintaining collaboration long term in an operational sense, I think, I don't have the answer, but I think that's a focus. That's
so I guess that would be the transition from collaboration in an R&D point of view to actually a supply chain or an ecosystem that works together.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at David Webb's point from CCAV around, where the government's looking in CAM, it's around, strong supply chains and deployment, and that should be our focus next.
Okay, great, thank you. Philippa. A couple of people have talked about the government bodies working together. What's your view? What do you think?
So we do work together. I think actually the UK funding landscape is very good, and so like I said on it, we do work together. We work very closely with DER. I'm on their advisory group, work closely with Faraday, and actually it's how they all fit together. And actually in terms of that signposting, making sure UK businesses don't fall through the gaps, that is something that we are doing more, and that has been a significant change that I've seen sort of over the last 2-3 years. Okay. In addition to that, there's things like, APC has a transport energy network which looks across those different transport nodes, looking at where the opportunity is. We work closely with the ATI and the Fly Zero initiative, and they tell us, where are all the best, electric machine designers and things like that. But not only that, but I know the Escape project's been talked about quite a lot today, and I know that there was this industrial advisory group yesterday, but for example, Rolls-Royce came to that. So again, that understanding, and if it can be shared understanding, say, a project which is developed in auto that can transition into some of the other sectors, because as we know, the product life cycle is much shorter in auto, so actually how can it benefit the other sectors as much as possible? And much as what Mark said, it's actually the supply chain that gives that agility, I think, to businesses to have that transition.
Yeah. Great, thanks. Yeah, and I think it's easy to throw rocks and say, people aren't talking to each other, but I would agree with the other points that, when you do compare our funding opportunities with other territories, we're by far ahead of a lot of our European competitors.
But we do need more money.
We obviously need more money, yeah. And the other thing I would take this opportunity just to say is there are a lot of different funding bodies in the ecosystem, and AESIN are in a great place to try and bring all that together. So if you need to talk to anybody, come and talk to us. And of course, one of the newer ones being DER. What isn't happening? So you guys have just had some funding, you're building up your innovation centres. What isn't happening? What is it that's frustrating you in order to make bigger change?
How long have you got? Over wine, I think, could be a better. I think the biggest challenge we've got at the moment is trying to do the best we can with the smallest pot of money, and having to listen to industry partners, having those challenges across. So as much as we talk to each other, it starts with the funding. So that coordinated approach that I mentioned. So for example, I might work with a company who want to do something around the system integration, but they want to do something with battery, but I can't include battery because it doesn't fit into that funding call. So that company then has to wait for another funding call to bid into it. And if we truly want to accelerate what we're talking about to 2050, that's the bit that needs to join up. So it's not that we're not talking, it's the fact that the way that the interventions or the way that the funding is managed through government isn't aligned and doesn't allow people to accelerate. So I think they need to think broader across the sectors as well. We noticed that, what's the same for auto could be the same for small marine, but you can't bid into an APC fund. And I ring Philippa regularly saying, are you sure there isn't a way around it? Are you sure? But it's that kind of flexibility that I think's needed to allow this, because I think we are all talking, but we just don't have that control.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Now I'm being told we've got to make a movement on. We've got to clear this out so we can get ready for dinner, and I hope everyone's staying for dinner later. In the last 5 seconds each, this is probably a bit of crystal ball gazing, but what's your prediction in regards to meeting the 2050 net zero date? Will we do it? Let's start from the other end on the academic side.
So yes or no, do.
I think it's absolutely possible. Absolutely possible. We need a few policy interventions, as I said, which are happening on the net zero side. I would say if we can get this message across that net zero will not only be achieved by just land transport. If we are serious about net zero, it's all modes. Then the cross-domain thing needs to happen. So I think on the land side, I'm fairly confident it will happen, but it needs a bit more.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
I think it's highly challenging, but who doesn't love a good challenge? And I think the really key piece to nail on this is the behavioural aspect, because that is usually the stuff that is most difficult to sort. So yeah, I feel like it's a real challenge, but I think it can be done, but in the right way.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Yep. I mean, why not? You know, we've got to step out in confidence that we've got, you know, and yeah, I agree. There's lots going on. It is going to be really difficult. But if we're sitting here going, oh, I don't think we can do it, we're not going to do it. So we have to have confidence in what we're trying to go.
Yeah, thank you, Philippa.
I think we've probably got the capability and the innovation to get us there, but it's about commercialising that and accelerating that through, and that will be the hardest thing because that will need investment and de-risking.
And is that, and I guess on that side of things, is the investment by industry as well, not just the government. Yeah. And lastly, but not least, Rachel?
I would say if government listened to everything that the panel have said today, absolutely it's achievable.
And on that note, thank you very much. Thank everybody. Thank you.